Hey friends, are you dealing with excessive context switching in your daily development tasks? Maybe spending too much time looking for that one code snippet that you lost in the chaos of your development workflow. You're not alone. Even if you do surface that snippet in your Notes app or you find it in Teams, do you remember the context behind it? Check out Pieces for Developers. We use this to manage development materials across your workflows. This is the tool that exists between your tools. Now, it seamlessly integrates with your IDE, with your browser, and with your collaboration tool like Slack or Teams. And it makes it easy to save and search, share and reference, and reuse code snippets throughout your work in progress journey. Now, my favorite feature is Pieces Copilot. This sets custom context with your personal code base, and you can ask it who you can contact for a particular issue. And it's completely on device. You can use this Copilot without an internet connection. Super cool. Check it out. Pieces.app/Scott. You can download the desktop application for free and start boosting your developer productivity today. Hi, I'm Scott Hansel, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I'm chatting with Peter Ayedun. He's a CEO of TruGrid. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So you founded TruGrid about 6 years ago, but you've been in tech for as long as I have. You've been in tech since forever. Did you always know you were a techie?
No, it was actually by accident that I fell into tech.
Okay. So how do you fall into tech?
It was actually started in the late 80s when I was attending a college in Illinois here in the suburb of Chicago. The college is called College of DuPage in Glen Ellen. So while there, we were doing a term paper in English, and the professor insisted that she didn't want anything handwritten. She wanted us to have it all typed up or use a computer in the lab. So at the time, COD, short for College of DuPage, had a computer lab that had some Apple IIes in them. So I went in there, and I never used a digital computer in my life prior to that time. I had done Fortran before using punch cards while I was studying physics at University of Lagos in Nigeria. But it was my first time at COD using a digital computer. So I typed up my papers, and in fact, back then, Apple IIs had spell check in it. Yeah, it did have spell check. So I was actually blown away by it. I used a spell check. So crucially, by the end of that week, I was teaching other people how to use a computer. I was fixing printers in the lab at the time, and I'm thinking, this is so natural. So I was studying architecture at the time at COD, and I actually switched my major back to computer science as a result of this.
That sounds less like you fell into it and more like it found you and it dragged you into it.
You could say that. Really felt so good. In fact, I remember when I was trying to switch my professor at the time, Professor Wabiani from IIT was confounded. He said, Peter, you can't do that. I said, I want to do that. Because he said I was one of his best students in architecture. But I found computer to be much easier, more natural. So I really switched.
I think it's interesting that you say those words natural because, we've met people, I'm sure, you've got people like this that don't find computers to be natural or intuitive, but you knew immediately. So my question is this, why do you think some people come wired, regardless of where they're born, regardless of culture, regardless of age, they go, I get this. And other people don't?
That's a question I've never really tried to answer before, other than to say that I'm sort of a tinkerer anyways, when it comes to gadgets, radio equipment, so click and play with it, my children and I. So you could argue that in some sense, maybe it's more of an extension of that. Although lately, I don't like hardware much. I love the software aspect of computing. I ended up going to infrastructure, computer networking, and operating systems are supposed to programming. That's kind of what I ended up doing. But you could argue that maybe it was just logical for me. Maybe the way, I've always wondered that these programmers who decide to put a UI in one place and put the OK button somewhere, how did they come up with it? So maybe my brain works the same way their brains actually work. It's the reason why I fell in love with it. So it just was natural for me.
Yeah. I think there is that engineering brain. I was a tinkerer. I would always take apart the toaster, take apart the clock radio. You immediately want to see, well, how does this work and how can I make one?
Exactly. Maybe that's what it was. And up to that time, I didn't know that I had a knack for it. It was that opportunity. So, in one sense, I'm very thankful to that professor of English that insisted that we actually type out those paper. Otherwise, I would never, fall in love with it at that time. Maybe later on in life, maybe I will run into it, but that opportunity actually gave me an opening.
Does that run in your family? Or your parents engineers? Or do you have relatives that are also in the tech industry?
My dad was actually in marketing. In fact, in our family, I think my twin brother, I'm a twin, if I never told you. My twin brother and I, we ended up falling in love with computers at the same time. Although while I was at COD, he was actually studying aerospace engineering at Paris College of St. Louis University. And I was when I actually told him that I found this new thing called computer. You got to try it out. And said, no, I'm studying space engineering. So this was around the time I think Reagan fired a lot of many of the controllers.
Oh yeah,
the one to strike. Yes.
Yeah.
So I just I said, I don't know where this industry is going. I think you should try computers. So he gave it a shot, and I actually liked it.
So you have twin brothers now, both involved in computers for decades.
Yes. And then I have my younger brother who's also involved in computing. So then my oldest brother lives in Dallas. We actually have a lot of people in computers. I never thought about it. So my oldest brother is in it. I'm in it. My twin brother is in it. And our younger brother, Jide, is also in it. And then I have nephews that are into computers as well.
In the social tech space, and that would be like tech on social media, we get exposed to people from different cultures a lot more than I did in the 80s and the 90s. Like we know that there are things happening in the world simultaneous to us more than before. When I was coming up in tech in the 90s, I noticed a lot of Indian folks that were coming from IIT, the big school out there in India. And I think that most Americans would think, oh, well, a lot of tech people are from India because India invested in their tech industry. But now with Twitter and the rise of social media, Nigerian tech just seems to be out there. Is it always been like that, or is that a recent thing where Nigerians are getting involved in tech?
I would like to say Nigerians have always been involved in tech, because when I was in University of Lagos in Nigeria studying physics, there was actually a study for computer science. I just didn't get into it. I didn't even know that I was going to love computer science. And it wasn't digital back then. It was all based on punch cards. But I think probably more than anything else, I think Nigerians gravitate towards where there's money. So you have a lot of Nigerian doctors, because in the United States, doctors make a lot of money. The legal profession is also something that a lot of Nigerians kind of fall into. And I would venture to say that to the extent that in the United States, if you're very savvy with computers, you can make a lot of money. It sort of attracts a lot of Nigerians. So, we're hustlers. Nigerians are, so to speak, hustlers by nature. So wherever there's a way to make money, they'll try to go down,
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you talking frankly about these things, because I think people want to understand other cultures and where other people are coming from and what their motivations are. And I appreciate that you said hustle, because I wanted to ask you about what I have called and what I perceive as being Nigerian hustle culture. There's a lot of folks on social media saying, you want to get into tech, here's your step, here's a thread, here's a checkbox to go and do. And it seems to me as a West Coast American to be kind of super aggressive. Like, if you're not hustling, then what are you even doing? Is that a Nigerian thing?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I'm almost to the point of being judgmental sometimes. So I've learned to be more careful about that. So when I first came here, my drive, I felt everybody was like that. So, yeah. So I think you could argue that most immigrants have a drive about them to accomplish something. But what I didn't realize at the time was, just because I was willing to struggle and do whatever it took to be successful, everybody's path is different. It doesn't mean they don't want to be successful, but they may not want to do it at my time, at my pace. So when I first came to I didn't realize that. So I felt able should be able to work at my pace. And it was later in life I realized that, you know what? You got to give people a chance to find their own footing. So many of us Nigerians when we were growing up in Nigeria, our parents were very fierce in terms of pushing us to succeed. So, as an example, when I was in, we call it primary school in Nigeria, we call K1 through 12 over here, called primary school in Nigeria. So back then, I would come home with, between first and third, first, second, third. My father would never say anything. So I
first, second, third in like of all the kids
in class, in my class, yeah. He never said anything, so I didn't think he cared. But occasionally I would hear him boasting to his friends, but he never told me directly. So one particular term, we used what they call terms, so instead of semesters. One particular term, I came home, I think I was like number 9th in class. That was the first time he came to me and said, "What happened? Why 9th? Why can't you be between first and third?" So that's the first time I knew he cared. You could argue that most of my friends had the same feedback from their parents if they didn't aspire to be as aggressive as they want them to be. So for that reason, many Nigerian parents push their children to be either a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. Computers wasn't a thing back then, right? Because I'm talking in the 80s. So that's when you find a lot of Nigerians that are in that space, doctors, lawyers, engineers, and obviously now computer science. So yeah, that's pretty much where it came from.
I think we spoke about this a little bit earlier when we talked off camera that my wife is from Zimbabwe, and we have our kids that are now African and American, and the joke is that one of the kids will come home with like a B, and my wife will say, "Well, that's an African F. You need to go and get that fixed right away."
Exactly.
Is that a positive kind of drive, or can that become too much?
Well, honestly, back then everybody got the same feedback.
Yeah.
So you didn't see it as, oh, somebody had it easier and your parents were being harsh on you. Almost every kid felt the same, got the same feedback from their parents saying, "Really? 10? What about the other guys that got, first, second, and third? Did they have 2 heads?"
Yeah. What do you do if if you're first, second, and third? It seems like every Nigerian I've met this side is first, second, or third. What do you do if you're 100th out of 100?
Honestly, we're also very brutal. So the kids that weren't like, and this is a funny thing. So back then, there wasn't much of a realization. Maybe it's the same thing here, that people had different talent for different things. Maybe it's in arts, right?
Yeah, so true.
Yes, which really wasn't valued much back when I was growing up. Even though right now, Nigerians are topping the chart in Afrobeats, music and stuff, but it wasn't valued back then. I think when I was growing up, I think there were only maybe a handful of artists that were very successful from out of Nigeria. Fela Kuti, which was the Afrobeat king, and then King Sunny Ade and a few other folks. So just unlike the United States, where the music scene was huge, the music scene was huge in Nigeria, but only amongst a few artists, right? It wasn't like a predominant thing. So art wasn't valued in terms of in that realm. People felt that you could make money, you could make a good living by being a musician of sorts. So what was really promoted was more technical education, to be a doctor, to be a lawyer. And that's what pretty much every parent wanted their kids to be.
Yeah.
That's why, again, every parent wants their kids to be successful. And I know my grandmother really pushed for one of us to be doctors. I just can't stand the sight of seeing someone sick. So I never went that route. So
everyone's in tech and grandma's disappointed.
She's very disappointed. Yeah.
I love that you brought up Afrobeats, though, because of course now you're right. You could think Fela Kuti in the past, but now you've got Davido and Tiwa Savage and Thames and like Burna Boy and on and WizKid and CK and like on and on and on, right?
Oh my God, you know all these people. They should listen to Afrobeats.
You got to remember, the household that I'm in here has got one foot in each world. But what I'm hearing, though, from you is an acknowledgement of what is good about Nigerian culture and what is good about the American culture that you made your own, because you mentioned emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And it's okay to be inclusive and that you're, let people be excited about what they're excited about.
I've had to learn that, everybody's different. We have different kind of talents. And in fact, the world moves around. The world revolves better when there's a diversity of talent. We gotta think about it. Imagine if all my friends or people, everyone in the world is all about computers. It'll be a boring world. You gotta think about it. It would be a boring world. What am I going to go to the movies to see, right?
Yeah,
What?
exactly. People are always asking me about my kids. Oh, Scott, you're so successful in computers. I assume your kids are computer people. My kids have no concept of computers because I didn't push them and they didn't show any interest. Maybe I'm a bad dad, but
No.
it's just not what they're into. He wants to make comic books or something else, so he'll do that.
The one thing I'm thankful about, Scott, is the United States actually helped me to focus on the idea of happiness, right? Yes, back in Nigeria, parents push their kids. I mean, I have a lot of friends that regret being lawyers or attorneys or doctors. That's not what they really wanted to be, but they did it because their parents pushed them. So in United States, I've learned that if people actually find a job that makes them happy, they're probably going to live a more fulfilled life, I think, as I was being pushed into the profession that you're not really happy about. So growing up, my kids, I have 3 of them. I always actually encourage them to find their love. I never pushed them in any one direction about whether it's computer science or being a medicine. One of my daughters ended up being a pharmacist. She's the closest to being a doctor that my grandmother would want. But my oldest daughter went into HR, human resource recruiting. That's what she went into, and that's what makes her happy, and that's just okay by me. Yeah.
It sounds like you're promoting people to follow their passion, be flexible. Like you were flexible. You were going to be an architect. You discover these computers, you bump into that, and then you start exploring other business problems and realizing this business problem can be solved by something that I, Peter, can make. I can create something. When did you discover virtualization? Because you've got a really big background in virtualizing computers.
Yes, exactly. I think my experience with COD, as soon as I put the money together, I bought my very first computer. I didn't know the difference between Apple, IBM, PC. My very first computer was a Dell PC that had 80 megabytes of memory. And I discovered this book called Ashton Tate. It was D-based programming. And then another company called Borland. Borland was a D-based company. So not knowing which direction I wanted to go, I just knew that I wanted to be in computers. So the computer came with Army Pro.
Oh, man, you're scratching really old neurons in my brain. You have an 80 megabyte hard drive, big, giant, clunky hard drive, probably a megabyte of RAM and AMI Pro or AMI Pro. That was like the Microsoft Word for people who couldn't afford Word.
Exactly.
I had AMI Pro too. I think it's still out there.
Who knows? AMI Pro. So I just started turning around, and I actually did some DBS programming for a few folk, and then I got my first real job to allow me to use computers. So it was a QA work, quality assurance work at a local company in Chicago here. And they didn't have the computer systems. So I figured, I'm going to bring my computer in. So the AMI Pro was a suite. It had like a word processor and it did a spreadsheet built into it. So we're using that spreadsheet to track, all the inventory stuff that we're doing. So naturally, I told them we should build a network. This is the company I was. Now, I never built a network in my life. So they said, who's going to do it? I said, I'll do it. And okay, they said, go do it. So there was this thing called CompuServe, if you remember. So I went to CompuServe. So I asked, how do you build a network? So people were telling me.
Which is the equivalent of volunteering for something at work and then Googling how to make a network, except you went to CompuServe.
And then they said, you have to buy a hub. I said, what's a hub? So they told me what a hub was. So I found a local company and off my next days of Illinois that actually stocked hub. Like this was before switches tonight.
Probably Token Ring. Was it
Token Ring? You got it. IBM Token Ring.
BNC connectors?
Yes.
Oh my God.
So that's what they brought to us. I wrote a proposal to our CFO justifying why we should have a network. And they allowed me to build my very first network. This is using CompuServe as a backdrop to know how to build it. So I built that very first one. It was, like I said, IBM Token Ring. And it flourished. And then the company grew and we moved. So I got a chance to, when we moved, I went into Ethernet. Back then, Ethernet I developed a little bit. And I think we moved 2 more times and I got to build a fiber optics network. And that's where my background really took off in terms of computer science. So in 98, I left that company to start my first business. So.
Now, the business, though, was networking, but it wasn't involved in networking because I want to understand how virtualization happened. Because I remember the first time that I saw VMware somewhere in the late 90s, and I said to myself, it's a computer running inside another computer.
You got it.
And I couldn't get my head around that.
So what happened was when I was at this company called the Antenna Company, which is where I got a chance to really build the network 3 times. Towards the end of it, I think they were growing so fast, I got tired of having to kind of change floppy disk when I'm building our computer systems. So he used to send me to a show called Comdex. Remember Comdex show?
I remember Comdex. I actually went to Comdex and presented at Comdex to 2 people.
Oh my God, you've been to 2 people.
No. So I was at Comdex and I was supposed to present to a room of 1,000, but no one came. Oh. So I waited 15 minutes and I waited 15 minutes. Oh. And it turned out that Linus Torvalds was across the hall. Ew. And I ended up I sat on the edge of the stage talking to the 2 people who showed up about, making web pages.
Oh my God, now I would have been something.
Okay. So you're at Comdex.
Yeah. So I was at Comdex and then there was I saw this company called Weiss. They had terminals, the Weiss terminals back then. And then they had this thing called WinFrame. It was a product of Citrix. And apparently the gist of it was rather than having to, rebuild computers for 10, 20, 100 people, they build a terminal server back then, based on a Windows operating system. And you just plug in the Weiss terminals. And so the back end was a WinFrame multi-user operating system. And many people could run it up to the limits of the resources in the computer system. So I was drawn to it. So I took it back to my CF. My CF at the time would have me justify every expense. So I was able to justify how Citrix could be time-saving for us, because we were growing so fast that when people would join the company, I have to reformat the entire hard drive. Back then it was all floppy disks, right? So we got to take it all the time. So Citrix saved me a lot of time. So they approved it. So I just kind of felt, oh my God, the world must need this stuff. So the company was sold in 96. I stayed on for 2 more years. So I left in 98 to start my business. I was primarily to be a Citrix expert. So I started my first business in 1998 to be a Citrix partner.
Now, for folks that are listening who may not have the years on them that Peter and I do, these thin clients, these Wise WinTerm clients were little tiny PCs. Kind of like what you'd think about a NUC, a network. What does the word NUC stand for?
NC network computing. NC at the time.
Network unit of computing, yes. Or networked unit of computing. So they were little tiny pizza boxes that weren't really computers. They were just the thin client on the computer, and we would run Windows multiplexed kind of in the cloud, but the cloud didn't exist yet. You'd have big giant servers, and it was a money saver, right?
And it's still here now. So that's it's evolved now to AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop.
Exactly.
The concept. So Microsoft's hosting your virtual desktop in the cloud, and you use any device. It could be iPad or Chromebook or your Windows computer to connect to a virtual machine in the cloud. It's the same concept.
And that virtual machine in the cloud can get faster, and the local machine doesn't have to do anything. And that's the whole point. These are dumb terminals for graphical applications.
It's also good for security. So many organizations that run client-server apps with the software front end must be very close to a database. That's one of the benefits because it's on the same high-speed network on the back end. And then also when it comes to computers, security, IT can better lock down things behind a firewall than they can all the stuff on the front end. So
yeah, and that security move is really going to be huge, especially for not just developers like me. I need to have admin locally. I need to be able to be
compiling and stuff,
breaking my computer, compiling. But for an office worker who is primarily in office, we can't have them getting viruses, messing up their local hard drives. They need a secure remote desktop platform.
So the Citrix, the concept of I would say they call it server-based computing. I think it's now called. They have a different name for it. Gartner came up with a name called almost like is it cloud computing, so to speak?
Well, I've heard like confidential computing, referring to the platform. It depends on how secure you want things to be. You can lock it all the way down to the bytes on the hard drive being encrypted.
Exactly.
Individually.
You're right about that. So it's very common in healthcare. So there's this one of the biggest companies in healthcare is called Epic. So Epic Space is primarily run on Citrix.
My wife is a nurse and they use Citrix. And here's the thing, though, it's funny because we were talking about at the very beginning, intuitive versus not intuitive. When she runs Outlook locally or runs it on Citrix, she gets confused about where it's running because she'll go file, save as, and then it doesn't look familiar. And she's trying to figure out where am I saving this file?
Right.
Because it's so realistic.
So realistic, especially when you do the remote app as opposed to a full desktop remote. So people have different ways of doing it. Yeah. So that was really I started my first business foundationally to be a Citrix proponent. We did very well.
Mm-hmm. And now you're looking at ways to secure, RDP, the remote desktop protocol, and make remote desktop as secure as possible.
Yes. That's the foundation of TruGrid, right? So I haven't been a Citrix partner for so long. About 6 years ago, I was actually coming from a project out of New York. I remember LaGuardia Airport. And so I just was thinking, this very great product, but also very complex, meaning you have to have the right skills to do them. So what I discovered at the time, about 20 years of doing Citrix, was a lot of mid-market companies didn't have the expertise to manage it thereafter. So you call an expert company like my company to come and do it for you, but then you couldn't maintain it after the fact. So I was just lamenting this very fact to a friend of mine, Jason, who I had met at General Electric back in '98 when I did a very first Citrix farm. Jason's a programmer by trade. So he and I developed a very good friendship over the number of years. So I was just, he actually lived in New York. So I was just talking to him about the complexity of Citrix, how a great product, very capable, but very hard to manage. So he said, you're the SME in Citrix. I'm a programmer. We can just put our heads together and create a new product for the mid-market. I said, okay, let's do it. And 3 months later, we had a MVP, and that led to our TruGrid.
It seems to me, and forgive me if this is not meant to be an insult, but you made a network in the 80s, and you didn't know what you were doing, and you went and you learned.
Yeah.
And then you made a company later, 20 years later, and you're like, I don't know if we could probably do this.
Yeah.
It seems like the idea of the MVP, like you conceive of it, you do it without apologizing for not really knowing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And on the other side, you pop out an expert.
Yes. Well, so, what's funny, like, Scott, honestly, when the idea first came to me before I spoke to Jason, I kind of thought about it briefly that wouldn't it be nice to create a better Citrix product for the mid-market, not to compete with Citrix because it's very dominant, they have their space, but it is other open space that's untapped. So my first inkling was actually be a programmer, to go back and study programming myself. Because
and just do it yourself.
Do myself. Okay. So it was a good friend of mine that was in Silicon Valley. He worked at the time for Intel. So his name is Abdi. He said, Peter, why do you want to do that? I said, well, I just want to learn it. He said, well, there are many, why don't you hire people to do it for you? Oh, that's a concept. So when Jason, my buddy, who's a programmer, proposed the idea, I said, that's a perfect thing. I don't have to learn this new thing. I can just be the master because I have the knowledge here. I can tell people. So the foundation then of TruGrid was simplicity, because there has to be a reason for it. Because remember, Citrix is a good product as it is. Why create a new version? I have to solve a critical problem that Citrix can't solve, which is simplicity. So the foundation of TruGrid is exactly that, simplicity.
Right. And then again, this gets back to emotional intelligence and which is an empathy for the customer.
Yes.
You say, I identify the business problem, which you always learn about that in MBA classes, identify the business problem. But you're saying this way it happens now hurts the user. It is user hostile. Let's put ourselves in their shoes. What does the user want to experience? One click and a secure desktop.
You got
it. That really speaks to kind of your full journey from the typewriter and the Apple II to making it easier for people to get the work done on a secure desktop.
In fact, I was so stubborn about when we first started our developers. When they would do things that I felt was too cumbersome, I would refuse for them to release a product. So Jason quickly learned, my partner, he quickly learned, okay, this guy, I said, it was got to be simple. So if it wasn't simple, so it's essentially to create a virtual environment using that technology, you can do it in 20 minutes. That's very crucial. You couldn't do Citrix in 20 minutes. And I'm not knocking Citrix. It's a very great product. It's get towards a different clientele. So our clientele is the system admin that hears the word Citrix that runs the other way because they're very afraid of it. Those are the ones that we embrace.
Yeah. Well, it has been fantastic chatting with you, Peter. This is, I like hearing about other people's journeys and also seeing how both different they are from our own, but also how much we really are all the same.
I agree with you. It's the world is actually better because of diversity. And that's what I've learned, which, given my culture, my Nigerian culture background, and also what happened in America. Great country. Love it. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be talking to you as well.
Very cool. We've been chatting with Peter Ayedun. He's the CEO of TruGrid. You can check out TruGrid at trugrid.com. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.